Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, we're pleased to have with us Greg Hasek, who is a licensed mental health counselor and who has been a consultant with Music for the Soul on content. Greg is really, really good at what he does, and we are delighted to have him with us this morning. He is with Southwest Florida Christian Counseling. So, Greg, good morning and welcome.
It's great to be here, Steve. I'm excited about the program today and excited to talk about how music has been a big part of my counseling practice for many years.
Yes. And the first thing I want to ask you about is how did you get into being a therapist, or what first made you want to be a therapist?
Yeah, that kind of goes back to really how I grew up. My mom, I would say, was one of the best therapists without a degree. So growing up, my mom had a heart for people. She had me in a nursing home when I was around 5 years old, volunteering. So I learned at an early age how to care for people that had needs. So she was very much a mentor. And then when I got into my undergraduate degree, I had a professor that was very influential. She was a marriage and family professor. And she said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a marriage and family therapist?" And I said, "Well, not really, but I really enjoy psychology." So she ended up going to the graduate school that I eventually attended. And she says, "Here's some recommendations." So about 5 years later, I decided to make a trek across the country from North Carolina to Oregon and enter into a graduate school for marriage and family. So that's been kind of my journey. It was, key people in my life that influenced me.
North Carolina to Oregon, very different places.
Yeah, I kind of left North Carolina with long hair and a ponytail and a good old boy, kind of a little bit of an accent, to Oregon, where I had to cut my hair and become like a Quaker and independent and prepare for the left coast versus the right coast.
Little bit of a difference. I love that story about your mom and just how her influence in your life at such an early age
Yeah,
kind of got your feet on a path that, empathy is a hard thing to
yeah,
teach, right? And
yeah.
certainly, I mean, you just have a wonderful heart, and it's been good getting to know you.
No, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. My mom showed me to not judge people despite where they come from. And that at an early age, I learned doesn't matter who the person is and what their issues are, we can still love them unconditionally. And I remember a story where my mom, for 20 years, met with a couple of Jehovah Witnesses women that would come to our house once a week. And I would watch my mom with them, and she loved on them and they loved on her, but they never changed each other. And it was just always an example of my mom was very accepting of whoever that person was, but she wasn't trying to change them, but she was just trying to love on them.
Beautiful. Her mission field one person right in front of her. That's
Hmm.
awesome. How did you find Music for the Soul?
Well, I guess that goes almost 20 years back. I was attending American Association of Christian Counselors Conference. Before I met Steve at that conference, I had already been using music in my practice. I was kind of experimenting with it and had a heart for music. And then when I saw Steve at the conference, and he had actually a table set up there, and it was such an affirmation to me that someone else was actually doing the work, and it was an automatic connection. It was like, oh my gosh, this is like a perfect connection to someone that understands how music is important in people's healing.
How did you get into specializing in the area that you specialize in now?
Well, my two specialty areas are I specialize in treating sexual addiction. I also specialize in treating people that have experienced an abortion in their history. Specifically, I specialize in men in abortion, and I've been specializing that since 2004. As far as how I got into the work of men in abortion, I have a personal experience with abortion that takes me back into the 80s, 1980s, where I accompanied my partner to an abortion clinic. And I spent 5 years looking for help. And back in the 80s, there was no help for men. I was actually turned away at multiple crisis pregnancy centers, saying that we don't have services for men. Eventually, I found a support group in Greensboro, North Carolina, where it was an all women's group, and they let me kind of sit in. That was the first time they had let a man sit in their group. And that began kind of my healing journey. It wasn't until years later, when I went back to graduate school for counseling, that God put it on my heart that I wonder how many men were like me in this country that could not find help or receive services when
Yes.
they were in pain. And so around 2004, I began to make phone calls around the country, trying to connect with people that had worked with the issue of men and abortion. I brought together a group of people. We had the first ever men's summit on abortion for men in 2004. And then after that, we started an organization called Men and Abortion Network. And since then, I've been speaking around the country and parts of the world on how abortion affects men. And I'm kind of known as a specialist in that area.
It will come as no surprise, Greg, to our listeners then that when Music for the Soul began to think about a project to help those who had trauma over an abortion decision in their past, we turned to you as the primary consultant. And I must say, you didn't just suggest that we include men in the process of making that record. It was more of a command.
Good for you, Greg.
Yes, exactly.
And I want to play a little bit of a song. You actually said to me that when you had male clients confess an abortion decision in their past, they never looked you in the eye. They always looked at the floor. So I want to play a little bit of "I Wasn't There," and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, sounds great.
Protects, a man provides, a man stands tall and does what's right. That's why I feel this guilt inside. I can't seem to look you in the eye. You needed me, our child did too, and it's painful to admit the truth. I wasn't there for you. I wasn't there for you.
Greg, you've said that one session with music can make more progress than 5 sessions of talk therapy alone. So specifically around this song and that idea, say more about that. Why is that?
Yeah. So for one thing is when men come to counseling, most of the time they're coming because they're in a crisis. Most of the time they're coming because they have to. It's about 80% of those that attend counseling are female. And I always kind of joke that 20% of those that are being drugged by their spouse because they're in trouble for some reason. And that, unfortunately, our culture says don't seek help. In terms of men, they're often resistant to sharing what they've been through for a lot of reasons, whether it's cultural conditioning or gender conditioning. But when I finally get that man in my office who has to be here, and oftentimes that's because of a sexual addiction that I work with, they're very defended. And what I mean by that is their defense mechanisms are very strong. There's denial, there's rationalization, minimization, things like that. They also, if they have trauma in their background, they're pretty much cut off from their emotions. And so what I found was that talking was overrated in my work with men. Talking wasn't going to get me quickly very far. So I began experimenting using music and video with men in my office. And what I found was their defenses came down. They started to connect with their emotions in their right brain where their trauma was stored. And they began to make progress so much more quickly than just talking. And that's what I meant by in one session of using music, it was like 5 sessions of talking. It's probably more than that. In fact, they began to connect with their emotions, connect with the trauma, and also connect with the ability to have empathy with their partner. And there's no way I could get there with just talking.
Interesting.
Beautiful. Do you find that you have a more rapid release of your patients having used music in your profession versus the days that you didn't use music? Do you find that you get to release the patients a little bit sooner then?
Yeah, in terms of when they're finished with counseling,
Yes.
I'm not sure if there's actually an increase or decrease in the amount of time in counseling. I think it's just an increase in their progress, and it'd be hard to measure that. But what I can say is, in my work, my average client's about 9 to 12 months in counseling, and what I can say is, I use music throughout that whole process. They're here. In other words, as they go through stages of healing, I have particular songs that I use throughout that whole process, and I've been doing it for so long that it's like I know exactly when to bring a song in. I know the timing. I know kind of the topic area. So it's like I have this little card catalog inside my head.
Yeah, so you watch for those milestones probably with the client and then
Exactly. Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And like, I'll give you an example. If I have a guy that's struggling with empathy, for example, for his wife who just found out about, say, an affair, and he's not showing any empathy for his wife. Well, I'm going to go, okay, well, I'm going to show a song or a video or listen to a song audio and see if he can connect with the wife's experience much quicker. And oftentimes that's the case. And then you can see a tear start to come out of their eye and you're like, okay, I get it. Versus me trying to say, why don't you have empathy for your wife?
Right. Or the wife saying, "Why don't you have empathy for what you've just put me through?" Right? They
Well,
kind of
exactly. Because when you ask questions to a male, they're going to get defensive.
right.
Like, what?
Yeah. They need a female interpreter.
You know, Greg, when people ask me about music for the soul, I often give the example of there being a wall that
Yes,
we all walk around and we've got this wall that we put up to protect ourselves from pain. And that's where the defensiveness comes from. But music seeps through the cracks in the wall. Or if you
exactly.
want to call it a closed door, it goes under the door.
Yep,
And and it moves at the speed of light. So I mean, before a person even has a chance to gather their defenses, it's going right into that right brain and opening up their heart. And that's why you have those like tears spring to your eyes
exactly.
before you even have a chance to say, no, I don't want to do this. So it really, in that sense, it's kind of a secret weapon for a counselor. And I'm curious, why do you think it has taken the therapeutic community at large so long to catch on to the effectiveness of songs in this way?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Steve. Okay, so in all my experience in the counseling world in terms of the educational world, first is as a student, and then I went back and I was a professor, adjunct professor for 7 years. Everything that they teach in graduate school was very much a cognitive approach. You know,
Mm,
in fact, the most common treatment for depression and anxiety is cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay,
okay.
well, they're not talking anything about anything else. And that what they do is they overemphasize historically talk therapy is the way to help people. They very rarely talk about experiential therapy, which music is part of experiential therapy.
Right.
And so I think the educational system is really way behind in looking at alternative ways of helping people.
Yeah, you know, when you say alternative ways, I always think about the different ways we can learn through the arts. It might be dance, it might be a movie. How about experiential? For me, it can be very healing just to take a walk in the woods. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we absorb information
Yeah.
and learn that don't have much to do with the traditional classroom.
Exactly. And let me tell you one more thing about what music is like for someone in terms of their memory. In other words, if I share a song in counseling, right?
Yes.
They're going to remember that song months later. But if I talk about something, guess what? They might remember it for a couple days, a week, or whatever. And that's interesting. It's the very much same as church. And I often talk to pastors about this. I said, how long do you think someone remembers your sermon?
Till maybe lunchtime.
And so I think some of the problem in the church is, in order for the people to receive healing in the pew, they're not receiving it in the part of the brain that needs healing. They're only getting it in the left brain from a cognitive sermon. And so the people are walking out of the church just as traumatized as they were when they walked in. So anyways, I think church needs to change. That's my opinion.
Well, I'm all about more music as a worship leader or a former worship leader.
I think it's interesting that, of course, the Psalms were songs.
Exactly.
And I feel like the rabbinic tradition has a handle on the music piece that the contemporary church doesn't, because the church tends to say, okay, worship is the first 30 minutes of the service, and then we'll stop doing that and we'll talk, or in a more mainline church, okay, we sing a hymn and then we do the offering, and we sing a hymn and then we do, the sermon, and then we sing a hymn, and then, music has been very much put in its place.
Yeah. Just a little kind of couple, 10 minutes or whatever, 15. It's interesting you bring out David, because I use David example with my clients a lot in counseling, and I use like Psalm 139, and I changed the words of the end of Psalm 139 in addressing the right brain. I say, search my heart, O God, search my brain, O God, search my right brain, O God. So the heart is the right brain. When we talk about the heart in the Bible, change the word to right brain. So search my right brain, oh God. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, where the right brain stores them. And you know how that, and the rest is talks. I can't remember the rest of the words, but it's just, and lead me to a way everlasting or something like that. But the idea is, if we start thinking about that, the heart is not something in our chest, but it's something in the right brain where all of our experience have been stored. And even David is saying to God, hey, I don't know why I do what I do, but tell me, God, in that part of my brain where all my stuff is stored, what's going on?
Right.
Yes.
So good. With the Psalms too, it's just an honest, raw place all throughout, that God's clearly giving the permission to us to wrestle out the hard stuff, and the fact that the Psalms are music. So, I mean, it's just like so divine in God's plan for us to use music to wrestle out the hard things as we look at the Psalms, right?
Well, Greg, you're doing a great job of explaining the science, kind of the brain science behind this. I always say to people, mind and heart, obviously they're both brain.
Yeah,
mind in the left, right? The language in the left, and the melody in the right. But I think it would be helpful maybe for people to hear one or two dramatic examples of something that you've had happen in your office. Can you give us an idea of something that people would just never expect to hear coming out of a therapy office that has happened because of you utilizing a song?
Well, I've got story after story over the years, but I think about this, the Somebody's Daughter project that you guys produced. And I've been, of course, using that for at least 10 years. I think, I can't remember how long ago it came out. But in my work with sex addiction recovery, again, my average client is 9 to 12 months. Throughout the whole year of working with that client, what I do with the Somebody's Daughter project is I bring in songs throughout the stages of their recovery in terms of which songs are applicable to each stage.
Right.
And as they go through the healing process in my work with clients, oftentimes toward the end, they will renew their vows. They will recommit their marriage. They will sometimes have a new marriage ceremony. I've actually had the recommitment of vows in somewhat of a little ceremony with candles and music in my office after a year working with clients.
Wow.
And I've told you this many, many times. The last song on that album or CD or DVD is the Free song. And as I play that video and listen to that song, oftentimes the couple have renewed their vows in my office, and they're holding hands as that song is playing. And the guy is looking at his partner or his wife and said, I'm finally free. I'm finally free from this addiction that has torn my life apart and had controlled me my whole life. I'm finally free. And it's such a powerful experience for me to not only walk through those stages and lead to a marriage recommitment or renewal of vows, but then to have music as a backdrop, as part of that healing experience. And Steve, years later, they will come to me and say, I not only remember that experience, but I remember the song you played, which is so cool.
Well, you can imagine how that blesses me to hear. I'm kind of speechless. Becky, you should say something.
I'm just sitting here trying to keep my eyes dry, man. I just, I mean, I think as a woman too, but as you're talking, I'm like, golly, we're getting to a place where we need to have the song Somebody's Son. More and more women, I'm wondering if you're seeing in your practice more and more women coming forward with the addiction to pornography as well. I keep hearing about this, and it's remained pretty hush hush because it's always been known as a man's issue primarily, it seems. But now more and more women are coming out and being honest and revealing their struggle with it as well.
Yeah, what's interesting, Becky, is the average age of the group of people that view pornography the most, and it's around 30-something%, is the age between like 21 and 25 or something like that. What's very interesting about that, it's also the average age of where most abortions happen. So I think there's a correlation to the younger generations viewing of pornography with a high-risk behavior in terms of sexuality that leads to abortion. I think there's a correlation in that generation. And in that generation, there's a group of young women that have so much bought into pornography as being normal ever since they were a young child. And of course, they grew up with technology and the internet. And yes, they have bought into it as a normal thing. And the unfortunate part is not only have they started viewing it, but they think it's okay for their spouse to view it. And they're coming into the premarital counseling room saying, okay, well, this is a normal thing for my partner and we're getting married. And it's unfortunate to see that. And then, of course, years later, they're back in the counseling office and they regret what it's done to their marriage. But I think we're seeing a whole new generation of women that are not only viewing it, but are also thinking it's a normal thing for their partner.
And as I hear you talk about that, Greg, I can't help but feel, what does that do to intimacy between a couple that should be discovering the beauty of a sexual relationship between a man and a woman in a committed relationship? And they've already given themselves over to these images, hundreds or thousands of images. And of course, body parts do not equate to intimacy, right?
Exactly.
The intimacy happens between the eyes, right? Eye to eye. So I think that's a caution for young people. It's also a caution for parents who don't understand how accessible pornographic images are and the difference that they can make in somebody's development and the development of the brain.
Well, yeah, average age of exposure to porn right now is 9. I mean, and so if parents aren't concerned, they should be. And here's the thing: when a child grows up objectifying and without an emotional connection, if they objectify a woman through pornography or without an emotional connection, when they get married, the ability to have emotional intimacy is very limited.
That makes sense.
And the unfortunate part about what pornography does is not only objectifies, but it desensitizes to the point where if you can objectify a woman through pornography, then what's next? Then I can have an affair, or then I can do something else. And it's progressive. It's not just, it doesn't just stay in one place. And that's where the addiction kind of starts to take hold there.
Well, as you listen to Greg talk today, folks, I'm sure you're wondering how you can get in touch with him and learn more about his counseling service and how he can help people who have either an abortion experience in their past or dealing with sex addiction. Greg's website is southwesternchristiancounseling.org, and it's abbreviated, so it's SWFL Christian Counseling. Christian counseling part's all spelled out, so SWFL christiancounseling.org, and the email is simply the same, swflchristiancounseling@gmail.com. He's also been on a couple of podcasts that he'd like to recommend to you. Empowered Manhood podcast, the Support After Abortion podcast. And Greg, you and I did a thing on Moody Radio a while back.
Exactly.
And I'm wondering where people can find that, but I'm sure through the magic of Google, they can figure it out. Steve Seiler, Greg Hasek, Moody Radio. It was the Chris Fabry show that we
That's
were on.
right. Yeah. In fact, we had those two songs about men on the Mercy Great Enough on that show, and so we actually talked about, those songs on that show and how I use those in my work with men.
Yes, Mercy Great Enough is the project that I Wasn't There is on.
Exactly. And You'll Never Call Me Daddy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, certainly thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing and that you continue to do. I love that you're a voice for men who have walked through the journey of abortion as well. That is so powerful. And I think there's a lot of men out there that have silently struggled for a lot of years, as our world sees it as primarily only involving women. But certainly there are men who are in the middle of grief too, and struggling with that feeling of helplessness and stuff. So just thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you for all that you do to bring hope and healing to people. And just enjoy what you do. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for what you do, not only in your singing, your songs, but also just what Music for the Soul does. That, my hope in the future as a therapist is that, many, many more therapists out there understand the power of music and counseling, and that we can together influence those therapists, not only in your work, but also in just kind of our work together in educating those therapists of how to use music in counseling.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed the discussion today, please share it with a friend and give us a positive review on iTunes.
And please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog. That would include I Wasn't There, and also the song Free that Greg talked about today, the two projects, Mercy Great Enough, Finding Hope After Abortion, Somebody's Daughter, A Journey to Freedom from Pornography. You can also read our lyrics, our healing music guide, our blog posts, and much more. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.
A man protects, a man provides, a man stands tall and does what's right. That's why I feel this guilt inside. I can't seem to look you in the eye. You needed me, our child did too, and it's painful to admit the truth. I wasn't there for you. I wasn't there for you. The words come slow, there's so much shame from this failure. I don't want a name, but I know that there's no way to heal till I speak out loud the things I feel. You needed me, our child did too, and it's painful to admit the truth. I wasn't there for you. I wasn't there for you. If I know then what I know now, we could have made it work somehow. You needed me, our child did too, and it's painful to admit the truth. I wasn't there for you. I wasn't there